On the morning of September 14, 2019, a voicemail was recovered from the personal phone of a 73-year-old woman named Edna Calloway, and buried inside that voicemail, beneath Edna's trembling voice, was a second voice, calm and precise, listing her daughter's home address, her work schedule, the route she drove to the grocery store every Tuesday, and the name of her youngest child. Edna Calloway had been dead for 11 hours by the time anyone listened to it. By the end of this, you will understand why the voicemail itself wasn't the most disturbing part of this case. The most disturbing part was what investigators discovered when they traced that background voice back to its origin. Because what they found proved that whatever was speaking had known where Karen Calloway lived, what she ate for breakfast, and when she put her children to bed, a full 18 hours before Edna had even been brought through the front doors of Maplecrest Residential Care Facility. Before any phone call, before any connection between that building and that family had ever been made. Maplecrest sits on the eastern edge of Dellwood, Ohio, a small, tired city that smells like river water and old rain regardless of the season. The facility itself was built in 1974, and you can feel that in every square inch of it. The carpets in the hallways are a shade of green that doesn't exist in nature, worn flat and colorless in the center where decades of shuffling feet have ground them down to something close to nothing. The walls are painted an institutional off-white that has slowly yellowed over the years into something resembling old teeth. In the evenings, the fluorescent lights in the east wing flicker with a low, irregular pulse. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone ever thought to fix, just enough to make you feel like the building itself is breathing unevenly. Room 9 is at the end of that east wing. Edna Calloway arrived at Maplecrest on the afternoon of September 13, 2019, following a stroke that had left her with limited mobility on her left side and, according to her admissions paperwork, moderate confusion and intermittent memory disruption. Her daughter Karen had driven her from the hospital, had helped her settle into the room, had arranged the small framed photographs on the nightstand, one of Karen's 2 children, one of Edna and her late husband Raymond at Niagara Falls, taken sometime in the early 1980s. Karen stayed for 3 hours. She straightened the blankets twice. She told her mother she would come back on Sunday. She cried in the car on the way home but didn't tell her husband why. The staff who processed Edna's admission described her as quiet, cooperative, and frightened in the way that people are frightened when they're too exhausted to show it openly. Her hands shook slightly. She asked 3 times whether the window in her room could be locked, and each time she asked, she turned her head toward it first, as though she had heard something outside before the thought had fully formed. The window looked out onto a narrow concrete service path and, beyond that, a chain-link fence overgrown with dead ivy. There was nothing there. A nurse named Patricia Odom, who had worked the East Wing for 6 years, checked on Edna at 9:15 that evening and described her as settled, if restless. The television was on with the volume low. Edna was lying on her back, watching the ceiling rather than the screen. Patricia noted in her log that the patient seemed, and this was her exact word, listening. Not anxious, not confused, listening. And what investigators found when they finally pulled the full audio file of that voicemail, the uncompressed version, the one that had to be formally requested from the network carrier and hadn't been listened to in its entirety by anyone before that point, would make Patricia Odom call in sick for 4 days straight and eventually request a permanent transfer away from the East Wing. Because the background voice didn't just list Karen's routine. At exactly the 47-second mark, it stopped mid-sentence. And then, in a register so low it almost sat beneath the threshold of hearing, it said Karen's daughter's name. The youngest one. The one who was 7 years old and had never been mentioned to anyone at Maplecrest. The one Karen hadn't even told her own mother about yet. Her name was Lily, 7 years old, gap-toothed, afraid of thunderstorms, obsessed with a particular brand of strawberry yogurt that Karen had to drive to a specific supermarket to buy because the regular one didn't stock it. Lily Calloway Marsh, a child who had never set foot inside Maplecrest Residential Care Facility. A child whose name had never passed through her grandmother's lips to any member of staff, because Edna's memory, fragmented and stuttering as it was, had not retained the name of Karen's youngest with any reliability since the stroke. Karen had noticed this in the hospital. She had not told anyone. She had simply begun calling the girl your little one when she spoke to her mother, to spare Edna the embarrassment of forgetting. So the name on that voicemail, Lily, spoken low, spoken carefully, pronounced with the particular weight of something reading from a list, had not come from Edna. That was the first thing investigators confirmed, and it took them 4 days to confirm it because 4 days was how long it took for anyone to admit openly what they had already understood privately the moment they heard it. The lead investigator assigned to the case was a man named Detective Carl Beaumont, a 17-year veteran with the Delwood County Sheriff's Department who had spent the majority of his career on financial crimes and missing persons cases and had, by his own account, never worked anything he would describe as unexplainable. He would later say, in a recorded deposition, that the Calloway voicemail was the only piece of evidence he had ever encountered that made him feel physically unwell simply from listening to it. Not disturbed, not unsettled, physically unwell, the way you feel when something is wrong with the air in a room, when the pressure shifts and your inner ear registers it before your brain does. He listened to the full 43-second audio file 11 times in total. He made notes after each listen. By the 11th play, his notes had become shorter and shorter until the final entry, which read only, "It knows about Sunday." He never elaborated on that note in any subsequent interview. The technical analysis of the voicemail returned results that were, in the language of the forensic audio report, anomalous and resistant to conventional sourcing. The background voice had been recorded at a distinctly different acoustic signature than Edna's, the ambient reverb, the microphone distance, the way the consonants sat against the silence, all pointed to a recording environment that was not the same room and possibly not the same building. The forensic analyst's conclusion, stated plainly in the final paragraph of her report, was that the background voice had not been captured live. It had been embedded in the audio file in a manner consistent with a secondary recording being layered beneath the primary. Deliberately, precisely. But here is the thing that the forensic analyst could not explain, and the thing that Beaumont kept returning to in the weeks that followed, unable to let it rest. The secondary recording had been embedded before the voicemail was made. The metadata, the raw, unmanipulated timestamp data recovered from the network carrier's server logs, showed that the audio layer containing the background voice had been attached to Edna's contact profile as an incoming audio file at 6:48 in the morning on September 13, 2019. Edna Calloway did not arrive at Maplecrest until 2:17 that same afternoon. She had not yet been admitted. She had not yet been assigned to room 9. The facility had not yet processed her paperwork, had not yet placed her name on the East Wing's resident board, had not yet entered her emergency contact, Karen Calloway Marsh, listed with a phone number and a home address, into their system. At 6:48 that morning, Edna was still in her hospital bed 4 miles away, eating toast she couldn't taste and watching the window because she had always been a woman who watched windows when she was afraid, and she had been afraid for 3 days by then, though she could not have told you of what. But something that would come to be tied irrevocably to room 9 at the end of the East Wing of Maplecrest Residential Care Facility, had already found her daughter, had already found her grandchildren, had already been listening, and investigators would spend the next 6 weeks trying to determine whether the voice on that recording was a who or a what before the question was rendered almost irrelevant by what a maintenance worker named Dennis Har discovered when he was sent to check the ventilation unit inside room 9 approximately 3 weeks after Edna Calloway's death. Dennis Har had worked at Maplecrest for 11 years. He was 61 years old, practical to the point of bluntness, and completely uninterested in the stories that had begun to circulate among the night staff about the East Wing since September. He went into room 9 at approximately 11 a.m. on a Tuesday morning with a flashlight, a vent removal tool, and a work order clipped to his belt. He called the front desk from inside the room 12 minutes later. He was not hysterical. He was not crying. His voice, according to the receptionist who took the call, was the voice of a man who had gone very still inside himself the way that people go still when the alternative is something they cannot afford to be. He said, "I need someone to come down here. I need someone to come down here right now and tell me how long this has been here." And when the assistant manager arrived at room 9 and looked at what Dennis Har was holding, what he had removed from behind the ventilation grill, tucked flat against the interior ductwork, folded once in the center, she would later describe the sensation of seeing it as the feeling of the floor dropping away beneath her, slowly, without sound. It was a piece of paper, handwritten, in blue ink, in the careful, slightly trembling cursive of a woman in her 70s who had limited mobility in her left hand following a stroke. It was addressed to Lily. But nothing could have prepared them for what was written inside it, because what Edna Calloway had written in that room, in those final hours, was not a farewell. It was not a grandmother's last words of love to a grandchild she feared she would never see again. It was a warning, specific, numbered, written in the clipped, frightened shorthand of someone transcribing something they were hearing rather than composing something they were thinking. 7 items. Each one a behavior, a location, a time of day. Each one corresponding to a detail of Lily's daily life that Edna Calloway, with her fractured memory and her limited mobility and her one night in a facility she had never visited before, could not possibly have known. Item for Red. She leaves her bedroom window unlatched on warm nights. She needs to stop doing this. Item 7 Red. It already knows her name. It has for a long time. And beneath the list, in letters that pressed harder into the paper as though the hand had been shaking with something beyond the physical, Edna had written 4 final words. Don't come on Sunday. Karen had told her mother she would come back on Sunday. She had said it in the room on the afternoon of September 13th, before she cried in the car on the way home. She had said it quietly, while she smoothed the blanket, while the photographs sat on the nightstand and the window looked out onto the chain-link fence with its dead ivy, while Edna had lain there looking toward the glass as though she could hear something gathering just beyond it. Karen had said she would come on Sunday. And Sunday was tomorrow. Karen Calloway Marsh received the call at 8:47 on Saturday evening. She was standing in her kitchen, doing the thing she always did when she was trying not to think. Washing dishes that were already clean, running hot water over her hands just to feel something ordinary, something domestic and safe. The window above the sink was dark. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet in the way that autumn evenings in Ohio are quiet, which is to say completely, heavily, like something pressing down from above. Her phone screen lit up on the counter. The number was Maplecrest's main line, and she knew before she answered it, the way you always know, the way your body registers the truth a full second before your mind allows it, that something had already happened that could not be undone. The assistant manager, a woman named Ruth Hensley, told her about the paper in a voice that was trying very hard to be professional and not quite managing it. She told her about the ventilation grill, about Dennis Haar, about the handwriting, the 7 items, the numbered list. She told her as carefully and as quickly as she could, the way you tell someone something when you are afraid that waiting any longer is itself a form of harm. Karen did not speak for a long time after Ruth finished. Then she said, "What did item 4 say? Tell me exactly what it said." Ruth read it to her. She leaves her bedroom window unlatched on warm nights. She needs to stop doing this. Karen put the phone down on the counter without ending the call and walked, very quickly, down the hallway of her house, past the photographs on the wall, past the coat rack with the children's jackets on it, past everything ordinary and familiar and solid, and she opened the door to her daughter's bedroom. Lily was asleep, 7 years old, gap-toothed, one arm thrown over the edge of the mattress in the abandoned, boneless way that children sleep when they feel completely safe. The night light in the corner threw a soft orange glow across the room. The ceiling was covered in plastic glow-in-the-dark stars that Lily had arranged herself, painstakingly, over the course of an entire Saturday afternoon the previous spring. The window was open, not wide, an inch, maybe 2, just enough to let in the cool September air. Just enough. Karen crossed the room and closed it and locked it and stood there with her hand on the latch for a long time, staring through the glass at the dark yard beyond, at the oak tree at the back fence, at the shadows between things, at all the places where something could be very still and very patient and completely invisible. And she understood, in a way that had no language and did not need one, that the distance between her daughter and whatever had been watching was exactly the width of an unlatched window and a warm night. She did not go to Maplecrest on Sunday. She never went back to Maplecrest at all. Detective Carl Beaumont closed the official investigation into the Calloway voicemail in November of 2019, citing an inability to identify a human perpetrator and insufficient evidence to pursue prosecution of any individual. The forensic audio file was archived. The background voice was never identified. The note from Room 9 was entered into evidence, photographed, logged, and sealed in a manila envelope where it has remained since, in a storage facility in Delwood County. in a box marked with a case number that corresponds to a file most people at the sheriff's department no longer ask about. Patricia Odom, the nurse who had noted that Edna seemed to be listening on the night of September 13th, transferred out of the East Wing and eventually left nursing altogether. She now works in a florist shop in a town 40 miles from Delwood. She has been asked about the Calloway case twice in the years since, and both times she gave the same answer in the same quiet voice, looking at the same middle distance that people look at when they are remembering something they wish they couldn't. She said, she knew. She knew from the window. The first night, she already knew it was there, and she spent the whole night listening to it get closer. Dennis Haar retired from Maplecrest in the spring of 2020. He has never publicly described what he felt in the 12 minutes he was alone in room 9 before he called the front desk. The only comment he ever made to a colleague in passing was this: whatever wrote that note wasn't writing for the girl's sake. It was writing so that we would find it, so that we would know it knew, so that we would understand there was nothing we could have done, because by the time Edna got to that room, it had already been there for years, and it had been waiting for someone in that family for longer than any of us were comfortable thinking about. Nobody has lived in room 9 since September 2019. The facility's management has offered various explanations over the years: renovation, reassignment, reallocation of space. The door stays closed. The fluorescent light at that end of the East Wing still flickers with its low, uneven pulse, like something breathing out of rhythm, like something that has all the time in the world and knows it. Karen Calloway Marsh moved her family out of their house in February 2020. New city, new state. She has not said publicly where they went. She keeps Lily's window locked regardless of the season, regardless of the heat. Every warm night before she goes to bed, she checks it. And then she checks it again. She told a close friend, once, only once, that what frightened her most was not the voice on the recording, not the note in the duct, not even the open window. What frightened her most was item 7 on her mother's list. It already knows her name. It has for a long time, because her mother had written that in the present tense, not the past. Not it knew, not it once knew. It has for a long time, which means that closing the window was not an ending. It was only an interruption. There are things in this world that do not need an invitation. They do not need a name spoken aloud, a door left open, a moment of carelessness. They simply choose and then they wait, and their patience is a kind of horror all its own, because patience that long does not come from something that hurries or fears or doubts. It comes from something that has never needed to rush, because it has never once failed to reach what it decided to reach. The truly suffocating truth at the center of this case is not that it found Edna. It is not even that it found Lily. It is that it let them know it had found them. It wanted them to know. It wanted Karen to close the window and lie awake and understand the shape of what was out there, patient beyond reason, precise beyond explanation, already watching the next warm night accumulate on the calendar. Edna Calloway died alone in room 9, at the end of the East Wing, with a flickering light and a locked window and the particular silence of a woman who has finished being afraid because fear requires the belief that something might not happen. She left a note for a grandchild she could barely name. She numbered her warnings like a woman taking dictation from the dark. And somewhere in the final hours, she must have understood that the note would not save anyone, that it was simply the last thing she could do with her hands before the room went quiet. That is the part that stays. That is the part that follows you. Not the voice on the recording. Not the metadata timestamp. Not the window with the broken latch. The image of an old woman in a strange bed, in a room that smelled like old carpet and filtered air and something underneath both that she could not name, writing in her careful, trembling hand, 7 things she had no way of knowing, pressing the pen harder and harder into the paper as though pressure alone could make someone, somewhere, safe. Every week, Mindshift Stories brings you the cases that keep investigators awake at night, the ones too disturbing for mainstream media. If that sounds like something you need, subscribe now and never miss a story.